Does the thought of going to work or dealing with the job you do, or even the people at your job, trigger anxiety? Well, for a lot of people, including myself, it certainly does. But today what we're going to do is uncover what the top 3 triggers are at your job that can tap into your anxiety and where this all stems from. Yes, let's get started. Hi gang, welcome to the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast. My name is Justin. This is the podcast where we use the philosophy of yoga in a practical and everyday way, one small step at a time to become happier people. I am just so thrilled that you are here. Welcome. If you are new, please be sure to check out all the links in the description of this podcast, whether you're listening to it on a podcast app or platform or on YouTube, where we broadcast this as well. You can follow me on Instagram through those links. You can buy me a coffee or engage in listener support. You can sign up for our free newsletter. There's tons of things that you can do down there to interact and grow in this community. And thank you so much for those of you who have been with us for a while now. And welcome to those of you who haven't, because this is a community where we're really geared towards trying to change our life one step at a time by using that philosophy of yoga in that practical way. It's just so important. And so today we're going to be talking all about anxiety in the workplace and the 3 triggers at your job. Now, for the majority of us, we have to go to work, right, in order to bring income in to support ourselves and our immediate families, okay? So we know that happens. Now, anxiety in the workplace is a very real thing, and it can feel very different from the general anxiety we feel every day when we're not at work. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But again, as I mentioned, we're gonna be looking at the triggers, and we're gonna start to identify where this anxiety is coming from. And then in the next episode of this podcast, we're talking about what we can do. We're gonna take those action steps to start to get some kind of hold on some of this general workplace anxiety. Because that's what we do here. We learn from the foundation, and then we build some steps to give us tools that we need to move forward. So let's begin by doing a very short exercise today. Now, I want you to pause the episode if you're able to grab something and write down on something or with something, or if you're not able to write something down, like maybe you're driving or you're working out or something, you may just actually think for a few moments while the episode is paused. But if you are driving or working out, or you're not able to get pen and paper, just pay attention to what's going on around you for safety reasons, right? You can even come back to this if you need to, but I want you to answer these 2 questions before you continue with this episode. Here they are. Number 1, what is it about your job that makes you feel anxious? Number 2, what is it about your job that makes you fulfilled? So I want you to identify what makes you feel anxious about your job. So it's not the job itself that's making you anxious. What about it is making you anxious? And then again, what about your job is making you fulfilled? So you don't want to say, okay, the whole job makes me feel fulfilled, because not one human being has every single thing in their job. There's always something that's going to come up, some kind of stressor in any job, anywhere, anyone. So not the overall. We're talking about what at your job makes you feel anxious, what at your job makes you feel fulfilled. So let's pause now, and I'm actually going to do the exercise too, and we'll be right back and we'll talk about it. All right, everybody, welcome back, okay? Now, I'm going to share my answers with you with regards to this job as the owner and the creator of this Strength, Yoga, and Freedom community. So we'll use this job that I'm doing here as an example, okay? So here's what I wrote. So number 1, the question was, what is it about your job that makes you feel anxious? So I wrote, I feel anxious because I think that what I'm teaching on here may not resonate with other people. I also feel anxious because I don't want to run out of ideas, I don't want to run out of content, and I feel anxious that I'm not going to reach more people because my content isn't good enough. I also feel anxious because there's a voice in my head that tells me sometimes that I'll never be successful at podcasting and etc., and teaching yoga to you off the mat could get boring, or that it's a waste of time, and that I could be doing something else instead of doing this podcasting, so why am I doing it? All right, so that was number one. Now, number two is, what is it about your job that makes you fulfilled? Well, I wrote, I feel fulfilled because it taps into my creative outlet, which is communicating powerful information to others. I also feel fulfilled because not only is this content helping you, but it helps me as well. I also feel fulfilled because deep down I know that while several things I do on here reach people I will never meet, I do personally know some of you, and you share the good that you get from the content. And that makes me feel fulfilled. And I also feel like this content serves my purpose, even if there are some areas of the business that I'm not great with, like ads or making fun and creative reels on social media, that kind of stuff. I'm not creative there. And so I feel fulfilled that the content is serving the purpose. So let's pause again and notice what I've said here. Because after listening to myself say these things out loud, and maybe you are looking at what you wrote, or you're revisiting what you thought about, there is really one thing that stems from my answers to the first question. Remember what I talked about in the first question about how things won't resonate with others and how I could be doing something else? Is this really a waste of time? Blah, blah, blah. Do you know what that is that's resonating from that? Fear. Like, why am I afraid of not being successful? And here's why. I'm going to tell you why. We trace this fear to the teaching of ahimsa, or nonviolence. Now, ahimsa is a yama of yoga, or a restraint. That's what yamas are, they're restraints. Now, yes, there is physical violence, but we're talking about a different kind of violence here. We're talking about a different kind because in reality, there are two types of fears that we have regarding something bad happening. And these are the two types of fears. Number one, we have instincts. And these instincts are ingrained in us as human beings. They're survival instincts. And so what we get into that survival mode when we feel like we are threatened. So we physically need to eat. We need to, maybe if there's a fire and you want to run out of a burning building, those are your instincts kicking in. That's that kind of fear. But then there's another kind of fear. The fear of not knowing, the fear of not exploring, the fear of not being familiar. This is the kind of fear that really does not exist anywhere but in our minds. You see, it's number two here, what I just talked about, the fear of not knowing, that blocks us from doing the things we are not comfortable with because it is unknown. Anxiety in the workplace often comes from this. You might be tasked with a new project and not know where to begin. You might be asked to teach a new class this semester if you're a teacher and you haven't studied that material or taught that class in years. Now, this happens to me a lot of times when I am asked to teach a yoga class in person or online, or even creating my own flow that I'm building for my YouTube channel that I haven't done in a while or I haven't done before. I really get extremely anxious and nervous when that happens. Why? Because we are afraid of something that hasn't happened yet. Ahimsa teaches us that we have the courage and we must tap into it. We must feel uncomfortable for a bit in order to see what will happen. Because after all, fear is in our minds. Nothing has really happened. Ahimsa also teaches us to create balance. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to take more vacation, because while vacations and days off and all of that are really important, the reality is we need to work in order to support ourselves. And that's the reality we must work from. So just escaping to go on vacation or just escaping to take days off so you can escape running from something is way different than running towards something and keeping your balance in check. Because you have to work. You have to work and you have to make money. The majority of us have to do that. But so we realize anxiety is nothing but your body having a response to that worrying, a fear that something's going to go wrong. You feel all those physical symptoms. It's the same physical symptoms you feel if there really is a physical threat to your survival. You get the palms sweating, the shaking, maybe your racing heart. You know what that feels like. But that anxiety also feels the same when you are actually excited. Do you ever get excited? You notice when you get excited, maybe you haven't seen somebody in a long time, or you're about to go do something that you haven't done for a long time, and it's so exciting, and you're back in a place that maybe you haven't been for a while, and you're just so happy to be there. You get all those same feelings. You get the sweaty palms, you get the shaking, you get the nervousness. And you know why that happens? Because your brain doesn't know the difference between good and bad. It only knows what it remembers, like a trigger, and then it remembers what you tell it. And ahimsa teaches us to slow down and balance ourselves so that we can work through the anxiety and create nonviolence. Because anxiety is never going to go away. If you have listened in some previous episodes where we talked about having bad days and all of the and the anxiety that shows up in our life sometimes, we remember that we have to work from that anxiety sometimes, because anxiety is a natural part of the human experience. In fact, in 2021, a study was done by Mental Health America, and they cited that 83% of the respondents in their study felt emotionally drained at work. But there's a big difference in workplace anxiety and symptoms of a bigger anxiety disorder to which you would want to seek help working through. We're only going to be talking about workplace anxiety here. We're not talking about anxiety disorders. Those are to be worked through with the help of a trusted medical professional, medical practitioner. So now that we have the foundation, we understand, okay, we know that there's a couple types of fears out there. We know that we get anxiety. We know we're going to have it at work. We know we're going to have it. We get it. We understand it. Let's talk about the main 3 triggers of anxiety in the workplace. And those are these. Number 1, deadlines and urgency. Number 2, your boss or your coworkers. And number 3, doubting your ability or your purpose. Now, before we look at these further, I want to remind you that you are not your job. You're not your job at all. Let's go back to the exercise we did earlier. Even though I talked to you about the things that make me feel anxious, the job, with the job I have here, of podcasting, this job of podcasting, and I don't even want to necessarily call it a job, but we're going to call it that for the sake of this episode, because most of us do also have other jobs that we go to, but we're talking about this one particularly here as an example with me. But even though I talk to you about these things that make me feel anxious, this job of podcasting doesn't really define truly who I really am at my core. Think about that. It really doesn't, that's not just who I am, right? So therefore, it's critical to know that when you remove yourself from the equation, like if I remove myself from this equation of this job, I realize this is a job that is a vehicle that I am driving as part of my purpose. It's important to take that first question, remember that first question we did in the exercise, and we say, hey, wait a minute. I'm not just a writer or a blogger or a person who records things into a microphone and says things. I'm using my talents to initiate things in the job that will help me find some meaning. Like what we wrote in the second part. What makes you feel fulfilled? Because the first step in any of this is understanding you are not what you do. You're not 100% what you do. You are you, and what you do is something that helps fuel you. It helps propel you. And not every part of what you do will help propel you, but parts of it will. So it's a balance. That's what ahimsa teaches us. So with that in mind, let's dive a little deeper into these 3 things. Number 1, deadlines and urgencies. Now, deadlines create stress and anxiety because for a lot of us, we like to procrastinate. I am a procrastinator at heart. I have really had to train myself not to procrastinate things. I have to force myself to get things done. And we do these things, procrastinating specifically, because sometimes we just don't know where to begin. We don't know how to begin or even what steps even to take. Now, why is this such a bad thing? And why do we beat ourselves up when we know we have a deadline coming and we're stuck? Only you can unpack the layers to that. But generally, I know for me, I feel this way the most because I am the one creating the pressure on myself. I sometimes am not gentle with myself. And you know where that goes back to? Fear. It goes back to fear. Like if I don't get this done by the deadline, then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then I'm not going to know what to do, and then I'm going to lose my job, and then I'm not going to have any money, and then I'm not going to have any, right? There's that anxiety loop again, around and around and around, because you feel all that pressure. So that's one area that always gets us stressed, deadlines and urgency. Number 2, your boss and your coworkers. Now, if you work for someone, they could be a trigger for stress, especially if the person you are working for is walking in a path of their own shit and their own traumas. Have you ever worked with someone or worked for someone, I should say, well, with someone too, but for someone specifically who has so much trauma that all they do is project all that negative shit out onto you? You probably have. I have, okay? The folks around you who work with you trigger this anxiety because sometimes they may not have the same work ethic that you do. Maybe you're on a team with other people and you feel like you're carrying the weight a lot of the times. And so the other people, maybe they don't seem to care. And maybe the other people get treated differently. Or maybe you have bosses that get treated differently because maybe they manipulate others or whatever the case may be. We know that there are many people working around us when we're at work. And you could even have people working for you, or you're working for them, who are not performing their job as they should, and that creates stress. You get to feel overwhelmed, you feel angry, you feel resentful when you see it. And if you throw a discussion about money in there, like how much people are getting paid, I mean, that makes it even harder, right? So that's number 2. And then number 3, another popular one, is doubting your ability and your purpose. Now, we all have to start somewhere, right? Now, I never knew how to create a podcast, and I hem-hawed around for months and months and months and months and months. I can't tell you how long before I actually stopped doubting myself and I took control of it. It is normal and natural to feel like what you do has no purpose and you don't have the skills or the ability to do the job. It's normal to feel that way. Why? Because we operate from fear. Remember how we talked about that? Those 2 types of fears, that physical fear, but then there's the fear that we create in our own minds in the anxiety loop. And it's normal to feel that way. And yes, sometimes when you do get into a job, you may find it isn't the right fit for you. But my goodness, even if you did do that, if you got so far as to even start a job and then you worked for a while and you were like, boy, this really isn't working for whatever reason, it could not align with something in your life, or maybe the skill set is just absolutely miserable for you. That could happen. But the fact that you actually recognized it and the fact that you actually said, you know what, I need to make some changes, is actually a cause for celebrating because you're aware of it. But we so often doubt ourselves because we think we just can't do it. And so now that we have looked at all of the things that could cause anxiety in the workplace, which if you've been listening and you've made it this far, you probably have figured out by now it's a bunch of freaking fear. We're just afraid. We're afraid of things that haven't happened yet, and we're making it all up in our head, and we're running through these anxiety loops. And my friends, when that happens to you, and you are doing a job that's driving you into your purpose, you're using it as your vehicle to drive forward into one purpose or another in your life, when that happens, and you're getting into these situations, and you're just overcome with fear, you are going to have the anxiety day in and day out because you just are afraid of what's coming, and we don't even know what's coming. Nothing has even happened yet. And so over the next episode, we're going to uncover 3 ways to get away from those anxiety loops that we run into in the workplace. And we're going to use ahimsa as some balance to do just that. To work on the balance, because your job, what you do at your job, not every single thing, as I said before, not every single thing that lines up in your responsibilities at your job is going to be fun. It's not all going to be purposeful and meaningful, and it's not going to make you smile. When you have technology problems and you're a podcaster like me, I love podcasting, but there are technology problems that get you anxious, get you fearful. That's an example. There could be something like that in your job that gets you so wound up. But what can we do to actually propel ourselves forward? What can we actually do to balance that anxiety in the workplace? We're going to talk about on the next episode, which will be airing in just a couple days. And guess what? I will see you there. Okay, one last thing. The content in the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast is not intended as a replacement or a substitution for the advice of any medical professional, like a physician, a psychologist, or a qualified therapist, or any other medical professional. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only.